My next guests have their fingers on the pulse of what voters want this election season. Nancy LeaMond, whom I just mentioned, is the Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at AARP, the sponsor of today's event. Nancy's for many years been studying the 50-plus community, and you got to get on her mailing list. It's so informative, and she's focused a lot on women voters. I'm also joined by two political analysts. Michael Steele is the former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, knows a lot about a lot of stuff, good friend, and really happy that he's here today. And Joel Benenson is the CEO of the Benenson Strategy Group. He's like one of these gurus who led the research and polling programs for President Obama's 2008 and 2012 campaigns. He's also provided communications expertise to a number of organizations, including, full disclosure, for our sponsor, AARP. I really appreciate all of you joining us. And Nancy, let me start with you. I mean, I mentioned the email specifically, and I feel very fortunate to be on your list. I don't know how the world gets on it. Maybe they just become members. But you gave and you distilled for me what 50-plus voters, particularly women, are anxious about, what they really care about. And you gave it in such a clearly articulated way. I'd love you to give our viewers right now a snapshot of that.
Sure. Well, and thank you. Thanks for having us today. Look, 50-plus women are, first of all, a very group. There are about 62 million of them. And it's important to remember they are not a monolith. They are important everywhere, but especially important in battleground states. We know that they're about a quarter of the population in battleground states, but they're going to represent about a third or more of the voters. So we've been very interested in following what they care about. And consistently since last December, when we began polling, right through COVID, it is very clear that women over the age of 50 are very worried. They're worried especially about healthcare, and they're worried about the economy. And of course, nothing has happened during COVID to make them any less worried. We know that older women, particularly women over the age of 65, are very focused still on COVID. They're worried about getting it themselves. They're worried about their friends and family having it. And then for women in the 50 to 64-year-old range, healthcare is still hugely important, but so too is the economy. And part of this is driven by the fact that older women have experienced, I think Senator Casey referred to this earlier, a very high level of unemployment during COVID. They were at about 3% as COVID hit, and it went up to about 15%. It's receded a little bit, but we know how important that is to women and especially their future economic security. In terms of the issues that they care about, and this has been consistent through our polling beginning in March and up till even a couple of days ago in Pennsylvania, again, very worried about COVID, very concerned about Social Security, the fact that it could be cut. Healthcare costs is a perennial concern. No matter where you fall in that 50-plus age spectrum, healthcare costs are going to be very important to you, particularly prescription drug costs. And then, of course, people are worried about retirement. Social Security, again, being one of the most, probably the most important issue consistently as you talk to older women.
Well, just before I jump to Michael and Joel, Nancy, I did quote you from our conversation about a year ago where you gave this line, says, well, it's clear the future of retirement is work, that these elder Americans who are so-called retired are having to go back and go to work. Well, then I think about them with what COVID has done, restaurants, shops, all of these things. How hard has that financial equation been for them?
Well, they've been hit very hard. And remember, for women over the age of 50, the average income is around $36,000 a year, median income $22,000. So the industries that they've been in have been hit very hard. It has huge implications for them. And of course, retirement security is a challenge for older women to begin with. Half are single. either separated, divorced, widowed, or never married. And all women suffer from some particular economic challenges at work. First, I think it was mentioned earlier, pay equity, being paid less in jobs than their male counterparts, taking more time out of the workforce to have children and care for children. And then also in terms of taking time out or stepping back in your job for family caregiving responsibilities. And we know there are 48 million people at least who are family caregivers.
Wow. Michael, you were a Republican still, as I understand it. And I want to ask Joel the same thing. I said, what case is your party making with the elder voter? And do you think it's a strong case that your party is making?
Well, it's a difficult case, particularly in the healthcare space, because there has not been the level of cohesion around a consistent, identifiable plan, particularly in the face of efforts by some, and at times many Republicans in the Senate and the House, and including the White House, to eliminate Obamacare. So that raises the level of concern that our seniors have, in particular, in the healthcare space. Then when you look at the other areas of sort of day in and day out care through Social Security and other benefits, again, the voice has been a little bit muted. And a lot of that has to do with the politics, the sensitivity of the politics, of not wanting to step on any particular toes. But that also is frustrating to a lot of our seniors who are, a generation of men and women who are, about knowing the bottom line, because they've had to manage the bottom line for their families, their communities, and their businesses. So it's put the Republicans in a very ticklish spot at times, Steve, in terms of communicating, articulating exactly what our policy is. We get the repeal and the replace. And a lot of us have said, okay, let's look at what that is. So what is the replacement? And even now with the administration saying, well, I have a plan for to deal with pre-existing conditions as they stand before the Supreme Court to eliminate Obamacare, again, does not offer the solution that a lot of seniors are looking for. And I think that's reflected in what we're seeing in a lot of the recent polling about how seniors are now much more soft on the Republican candidates and the Republican messaging, and ultimately Donald Trump, because of where they see COVID playing out and how it's played out for them and their families.
I want to go to Joel in a second to kind of see where the numbers are going on this, Michael. But before that, I guess the question I have is, when you look at Donald Trump's posture, which is basically saying, I'm an elder American, I got COVID, I got over it, and all of you can get over it. It's a non-issue or minor issue. Right. Is that working with your friends who are elder Republicans? Or elders anywhere? No, it's
not, because for a lot of those elder Republicans, they didn't get over it. They know family members and loved ones who weren't elderly who didn't get over it. And certainly you have, in many cases, we've lost our elder members of the community to COVID-19. So this sort of bravado is playing not very well for a lot of those older voters who are tending to a husband or a wife who's currently suffering from it, or who may have just received it, who are going through a very tough time. And here's the reality for them. The president was afforded a lot of medical attention and care they don't have access to. They don't have the treatment regimen that the president was given during his bout with COVID. And it's not very clear for a lot of them exactly when he tested negative last, or if he's still positive. So there's still this air of confusion. So when you beat your chest like that and say, I got over it, now you have to get over it, it's a flat message for a lot of them. And in some cases, from some of the ones that I've heard from on this, an offensive one, because they're still struggling with the truth and the reality of COVID-19, absent the kind of care and certainly the affordability of that care that the president has.
Thank you. Joel, I guess I'm a voracious consumer of polling data, like the Watch was doing, but also messaging. And I'll be honest, until about 5 days ago, I didn't see much messaging from either party about elder voters. And I thought that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this event, is I want to do this event, kind of look at it and say, hey, is this the next? Now, in the last few days, there's been a lot of talk about President Trump losing elder voters, about where elder voters are going. But I'm just interested in how you see it. If you were to be running a campaign today, does it make, I mean, not that it has to be a zero sum, does it make more sense to kind of, chase Gen Z and millennials or the elder voters?
Well, I think you have to do both, frankly. And I know that may sound like a facile answer, but that's the reality. You can't ignore the older voter, particularly now. Let's talk about over 45 or 50. Right. They vote regularly. They're going to go to the polls one way or the other, either mail or in person. So you do have to concentrate on them. And I think in this particular state, we just did this survey in 6 states in this election, 6 battleground states. And, I have a mantra about presidential campaigns, having done 4 of them. I always say they're about big things, not small things. They're about the future, not the past. And they're about their lives, not your life. Well, in the work we did for AARP in 6 battleground states recently, 1 in 4 voters over the age of 50, 1 in 4 personally know someone who died from coronavirus. And this issue has put healthcare in general on the map for these voters in particular. And I think they're going to be a vital constituency. And for the Trump campaign, what we saw in across these 6 states, and this survey was done with my firm, which is a Democratic firm, and GS Strategy Group, which is a Republican firm. But across these states, we see overwhelmingly voters over the age of 45. So it's a little bit below that 50-year-old cohort. But by 2 to 1, they want to preserve Obamacare. And so you've got a candidate out on the incumbent president making a case where he's downplayed coronavirus. He ignores it, told people not to wear masks. This is the most sensitive cohort and demographic group when it comes to healthcare right now. They feel most threatened. They are more likely to have illnesses that need to be treated. And the Republican Party, frankly, led by Donald Trump, is coming across as tone deaf on an issue that, if you talk about the biggest issue in people's lives today, it is the coronavirus. And it's the coronavirus and COVID that's affecting their views on the economy, which are also souring. So, any candidate who ignores this issue of healthcare broadly and treats it cavalierly and ignores this age cohort who are most likely to turn out is doing so at their peril. And I think that's why Donald Trump is struggling right now in every poll. He won seniors by about 7 points last time, and he is now even or trailing among them in most battleground states.
Joel, thank you for that. Michael, I want to ask you just, listening to Nancy, listening to Joel, I'm going to make you for a moment the governor of Maryland, the head of the National Governors Association, from Maryland, right? So Maryland's at, certain place in the country. But I'd love to know, what is the proactive set of policy priorities that the Republican Party could embrace that would help respond to what we heard from Nancy about the anxieties that these voters have, and Joel, the data that's showing this? I'm just sort of, we seem to be kind of looking at what's not happening, but what could happen if you were to put a smart policy package together?
That's actually a very good question, and there are a number of complicating factors that go into it. But in the main, I think you would find that governors like Maryland and states like Maryland, and certainly around the country, have been having a greater communication and coordination. Because here's the new reality: as a make-believe governor in your scenario, I would have to face is the cost of COVID to date. No one's talking about what our economies look like on the other side of COVID. So you have state constitutions that require balanced budgets in the face of 8, 9, 10 months of very little income from tax revenue and other sources coming into the state coffers because our workers have been unemployed, our businesses have been shuttered, et cetera, et cetera. So now you have, in the apex of that, seniors, our older populations, who are relying on a certain level of benefits and support, we've got to shore up that network between our state and the federal government to make sure that there is no breakage in that conversation on the resources that we need to get to meet those needs. The second thing is how we then maximize those benefits to the betterment of our seniors, to make sure that for those who are receiving care at the state level, whether it's home aids, whether it's medicines, whether it's recuperative services, that there's no breakage in those services as well. So shoring up that infrastructure is paramount, because the bottom line is that presents a greater cost on the back end of already heightened and accelerated cost if those services are not there than any other aspect of the budget. The biggest chunk of any state budget are two things: education and healthcare. And in that healthcare budget, a significant portion of that is how we're providing for the ongoing care of our elder populations. And so for me, that would be the first place I'm going to look, is to make sure that there is no breakage in that link between my relationship with the federal government, to make sure that economic connection is there, but then maximizing on the back end for seniors as much in those services that they need, so as to not have them fall through any cracks, because the attendant cost to that, not just in terms of dollars, but in loss of care and loss of life, is enormous.
Thank you for that. Let me get a question in from the audience. I'm going to direct this to Nancy real quick and then try and squeeze in one other question. This is from Chris Bremer, as an administrator of UMN. He says, it seems that women over 50 have larger and stronger social groups than most other demographics. Does this play a role in their voting behavior? And Nancy, when you answer that, because I think it's such an interesting question, I don't, again, know the answer, but you and I were recently talking at a forum where we talked about intergenerational connection. Why do we have a problem in this nation between different age cohorts that seem disconnected from one another?
Yeah. I'm not sure we have a problem other than sometimes in the media or sometimes social media. One thing that has struck me particularly through the COVID crisis is the kind of the family coming together. We now know we have more multi-generational families living together than any time since the 50s. And that was true before COVID. And we know that's only increased, especially with kids in their 20s. And what we've seen is there's a lot more happening within the family economy. Roughly 50% of boomers are providing some kind of financial support to their kids or their grandkids. That's beyond a Christmas present or a birthday present. And we know that 25% of those family caregivers are millennials helping their parents and their grandparents. So I actually think that there's really much less tension when we talk to our members and we ask them how they see the world in terms of different generations. By the way, I do think one of the issues, we talk all the time about Medicare and Social Security, and every year I say, why are we doing more polling to learn that older people care about Medicare and Social Security? Well, one thing we found in the polls that Joel mentioned is there's a new agenda for older Americans, and I would roughly call it the caring agenda. Paid leave, tax credits for caregiving are all polling at 75, 80% across women and men, Republicans and Democrats. And I think that is one of the interesting, and there are very few positives of the COVID crisis, but raising this issue of family caregiving to the front of some political discussion, I think, is hugely important. And your questioner is absolutely right. Women are engaged in their social networks, and an awful lot of them are talking about what's happening in their families and how they're caring for one another.
Thank you for that. Michael and Joel, just real quick each, I'm going to put you on the spot. When you kind of look at the 50-plus voter out there, what's the percentage Biden-Trump? Michael?
Well, I'm gonna defer to the man who's more
Oh,
in the
come
numbers than
on,
I
come
am
on,
at the
come on.
moment. But I would say that the trend line is right now favoring Joe Biden by virtue of the fact to what we've been discussing. Seniors are critically assessing the level of leadership and the kind of leadership on the COVID-19 crisis because they're so directly impacted by it. They're watching the impact on their family and their grandkids and their own kids, and I think that that's very concerning to them. And unless the president has a way of narratively changing that and turning that around in the 14 days we have left in this campaign, I think the advantage goes to Joe Biden for a lot of seniors right now.
Joel, I know I'm aggregating all the crosstabs that you folks like to break things down into, but what's your answer?
An over 50, Steve? Yeah, I think that Biden is going to carry the vote over 50 plus by somewhere in mid to upper single digits, somewhere between probably 5 to 8 points. And that's going to be a dramatic reversal compared to how Trump performed in 2016. And I think it's going to put him on the losing end of the stick.
Well, I want to thank all three of you. This has been fun. I always feel like, wow, there are these. I mean, I love all my panels, all my children. Well, you know this, but there's some of them. I just want to go a little bit longer. But Joel Benenson of the Benenson Strategy Group, Michael Steele, former Lieutenant Governor, head of the RNC, Mr. MSNBC a lot, Nancy LeaMond, Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at AARP. Thank you for a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for having us.